A black woman stood still in a courtroom, so he kicked her in the chest. No warning, no crime, no resistance, just silence. And that was enough to provoke violence. But what Officer Langford didn't know, the woman he kicked, was a newly appointed chief of police, sworn in just 6 hours earlier, now lying on the courtroom floor with the power to end his career. So let me ask you, what state are you in? And if this happened where you live, would the system protect her or silence her? Because today's story isn't about a courtroom. It's about the moment silence fights back. Let's begin. Wednesday, 9:07 a.m. Fairborn Courthouse. Courtroom number 2. The flickering fluorescent light spilled across a stained ceiling, reflecting off the faded gray walls. Walls that had witnessed years of quiet indifference. Below, wooden benches lined the room in stiff, cold rows. No cameras, no press, just a few local residents, watching timidly, people long accustomed to how justice moved in this town. Steady but skewed, like a broken machine left to run. Micah Trammell, 17, tall and lean with neatly cropped hair, stood silent behind the defendant's podium. His eyes burned with youthful fire, barely held back beneath his lashes. His wrinkled white dress shirt was buttoned up to a collar tightened by a chain-link cuff. No one asked if the handcuffs were necessary. In this courtroom, everything was already decided before he ever walked in. The charge, theft of a wristwatch. Its value was just enough to push the case into felony territory. No fingerprints, no clear footage, just a 3-paragraph statement from a store clerk, and that all-too-familiar phrase, suspicious behavior. Officer Travis Langford, 44, stood at the front by the security rail. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his posture rigid as a statue, arms folded, eyes cold. In Fairborn, he didn't need to speak. His presence alone delivered the verdict. A single look from him could lower heads without uttering a threat. He looked at Micah, the way one looks at a stain that keeps reappearing on a floor they've spent years trying to scrub clean. It wasn't the look of someone searching for truth. It was the look of a man convinced that skin color was evidence enough. District Attorney Richard Ames mumbled the charges in a voice so flat it might as well have been a grocery list. The defense attorney, a woman with frazzled hair and trembling hands, barely put up a fight. Her only plea, uttered like a surrender, was, "We ask the court to consider this as a youthful mistake, not a sign of long-term danger." And then, something unusual happened. The back door of the courtroom creaked open. No one turned immediately. It was just a black woman entering, medium height, hair neatly pulled back, wearing a long black coat and carrying a thick folder. No rush, no apologies, no words, but her presence, the unnatural calm she radiated, sucked the air out of the room. Her name was Nadia Trammell, 39 years old, newly sworn in as the chief of police of Fairborn, not even 6 hours ago. But no one in that courtroom knew that. She wore no badge, no nameplate, no introductions were made. Langford froze the moment he saw her. His eyes blinked, not from fear, but instinct. There was something in her gaze, something unspoken, that made him feel, perhaps for the first time in years, that he wasn't the only one in control of the room. Nadia walked to the front row, placed her folder down, and stood still. She said nothing, asked for no permission, but she looked directly at Micah. And that one look, steady, unwavering, told him everything he needed to know. She was here, and this time he wasn't standing alone. Langford turned, stepping slowly toward her. His eyes narrowed. His tone dropped to a gravelly growl. "Who do you think you are, just standing here like that?" Nadia didn't answer. She simply opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet stamped in red. And still, she didn't look at him. But the room, the very space that for years had trained every dark-skinned head to bow, suddenly felt breathless, silent, because for the first time, a black woman had walked in not to ask permission, but to change the rules. Langford took another step forward. In the courtroom's tense stillness, the sound of his shoes scraping the old tile floor echoed like the ticking of a bomb set on a slow fuse. He now stood face to face with the woman in the black coat, who still hadn't spoken, still stood upright, her gaze locked not on him, but on the judge flipping his bifocals atop the bench. "I asked you who you are." His voice dropped lower, thick with resentment. Still, Nadia Trammell said nothing. She shifted only slightly, angling her body away from Langford's direct line of sight, refusing to yield but also not engaging him head-on. Her eyes never left the judge. One hand stayed firm on the folder. It was a small gesture, but in a courtroom where silence meant submission and posture meant permission, that one gesture was a rare act of defiance. Langford's jaw tensed. He wasn't used to being ignored. For over 2 decades, he hadn't needed to raise his voice to assert power. A look from him could change the course of a room. A step forward could make someone step back. But this woman, she didn't bow. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. And it was that silence that rattled him the most. "You think you can just walk in here like you are the law?" Still no reply. Nadia opened the folder again, this time revealing a document bearing the seal of Mayor Donovan Reeves' office. She didn't hand it over. She didn't break eye contact with the bench. She simply held her ground. Langford's eyes twitched. He clenched his teeth. This is a courtroom, not a place for people like you to wander through. Just a beat, a breath slightly longer than normal. And then he kicked. No warning, no words, no justification that would ever hold up. Travis Langford pulled back his right leg, twisted his hips, and drove his foot square into Nadia Trammell's chest. From above, down. A strike honed through years of street suppression, of violent training drills no one ever questioned. The sound wasn't loud, just a deep, dull thud of flesh meeting hardwood. But in that breathless courtroom, it echoed like thunder. The folder in Nadia's hand flew open, its contents scattering like gray butterflies adrift in a stormy sky. She collapsed, sliding past the first 2 rows of benches, her back slamming into the wood. A strangled sound escaped her throat, not from pain, but from the breath that had been stolen. The room froze. No one screamed. No one moved. An elderly white woman in the 3rd row lifted her hand to her mouth. A young man clenched his phone tightly, but didn't raise it to record. A bailiff shifted a hand toward his radio, then hesitated. Langford stood still, his leg yet to fully return. His expression showed no rage, no shame, only a chilling calm, like the kick had been a reminder of order. He'd done this before, behind dumpsters, after random ID stops, where no eyes watched. But this time he forgot. This was a courtroom. And this time, a student in the back row was quietly recording. Nadia didn't cry. She rose slowly on one arm, the other gripping her side, where pain pulsed like fire. Papers still littered the floor around her, but she didn't look down. Her gaze, steady, undeterred, remained locked in the place justice was supposed to stand. No screaming, no fury, no blood, only the powerful silence of a woman who had been knocked down and got back up, knowing exactly what had just happened and who was about to see it. Nadia Trammell remained there, knee bent, one hand braced against the bench, the other flat against the cold wooden floor. Her face was tight with pain radiating through her ribs, but her eyes, sharp, focused, never left Travis Langford, the man who had just kicked her down like she was nothing but an obstacle in his path. Langford had taken a step back now. There was something unsettled in his posture. Maybe it was the silence hanging like a storm cloud. Maybe he was beginning to realize. This time wasn't like the others. Nadia inhaled, not from pain, but for precision. She stood, deliberately, without help, one foot, then the other, her balance trained, honed from military service. Because yes, she had once worn a uniform, too, and as she straightened herself, that seemingly slight frame commanded the room to a halt. She brushed off her coat, bent to retrieve the page at her feet, and took 3 steps forward. Just enough for the sunlight to catch her face. Just enough for Langford to clearly see the official seal of the Fairborn City Hall on the document. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor." Her voice rang out, not loud, but firm, clear, unmistakable. "My name is Nadia Trammell. As of 7 a.m. this morning, I was appointed Chief of Police for the City of Fairborn by Mayor Donovan Reeves. And under Article 14, Section 3 of the Internal Safety Statute, she turned to Langford. I have the authority to suspend any officer who endangers the life of a citizen or compromises the integrity of this department. Langford opened his mouth, clearly ready to protest. But before he could speak, Nadia raised a paper higher, an official appointment order bearing the mayor's handwritten signature and embossed seal. Officer Travis Langford, she said clearly, her eyes locked on him. You are hereby suspended from duty, effective immediately. Langford let out a sharp scoff, his face tightening as if he wanted to rip the paper from her hand. This is a joke, right? You don't have the authority. I just told you, Nadia interrupted, her voice as precise as a scalpel. I signed the order. I outrank you, and you just kicked the chief of police in open court. A soft gasp echoed from the back of the room. Then another. A middle-aged white woman covered her mouth, eyes wide. The young man with the phone? He was no longer hiding it. He was live streaming. A glowing red live icon blinked on his screen. Langford turned to look around. The eyes that once avoided his now met him directly, unblinking, not with fear, but with shock. A white officer kicking a black woman, the newly appointed police chief, in front of Courtroom, and every second was being recorded. In truth, Nadia continued, you didn't just kick me. You kicked away the last bit of faith Fairborn had in this badge. Not a word from the judge. Nothing from Prosecutor Ames. Just a crushing silence, and the soft vibration of phones buzzing in coat pockets. The news was already spreading. Facebook, TikTok, private community groups across Georgia. Langford knew, and he began to back away. Not out of guilt, but because he knew this time he couldn't erase the footage, couldn't rewrite the report, couldn't make a call upstairs to bury it in silence, because the system he once trusted to shield him had a new name at the top. Within just 6 hours of Nadia Trammell being kicked in court, the video of that moment had gone viral across America. On the front page of WZKX Fairborn News, the bold headline read, New police chief attacked in courtroom. Strikes back with truth. The 42-second clip, shot by high school student Isaiah Wexley, had been shared more than 2.3 million times that afternoon alone. No edits, no music, just the sound of shoes on old wood, a single kick, and the heavy silence that followed. Hashtags like hashtag Nadia Trammell, hashtag Justice in Fairborn, and hashtag He Kicked the Chief exploded on Twitter. But soon, a counter-narrative emerged. Hashtag Stand with Langford. Hashtag Soft on Crime. Hashtag She Provoked. While hundreds of articles praised Nadia as a model of leadership in an age of injustice, conservative outlets across the Southeast pushed back, labeling her an agitator disrupting legal proceedings, and casting Langford as a dedicated officer caught in the web of identity politics. But what exploded and proved far more dangerous were the comments. She's a threat being coddled by the system. So, white cops can't defend themselves anymore. Women like her are the reason officers have to second-guess every step. These comments weren't anonymous. They weren't whispered in the shadows. They were public, from real accounts with real names, sometimes tied to school teachers, former military, even local pastors. Nadia didn't respond. No TV interviews, no social media posts, no apologies, no rebuttals. She just kept working. But the real shock came the next morning when Ari Quill, a former police department staffer, unexpectedly held a small press conference at Town Line Park, once the designated patrol lot for Fairborn PD. Ari, 28, cropped blonde hair, a former civilian records analyst at the department, revealed a transcript of an internal recording from a closed-door meeting 2 years ago between Travis Langford and a former superior. In the verified audio, Langford could be heard saying, "Those black kids loitering on that corner, I don't need probable cause. I can look at them and know which one should be in cuffs." The recording was authenticated. No fakes. No edits. It hit like a bomb, shattering the long-standing image of Langford as a veteran protector of public safety. Nadia watched the clip from her office. She said nothing. She simply ordered a copy sent to the State Office of Independent Review. That same morning, graffiti appeared on the wall of a Fairborn substation. It wasn't just a kick, it was a system showing its face. The town fractured. In Westbrook, blue flags flew proudly from porches beside signs reading, "I back the blue." But over in Eastbridge, black mothers began forming a new group, Protect My Child from the Uniform. Mayor Donovan Reeves was forced to address the media. His statement was vague. Fairborn has always stood for law and order. We will conduct a full and impartial investigation. Nadia, unmoved, she carried herself with the same calm, as if she had been bracing for this storm for years. And amid the national chaos, a quiet event occurred. The internal record storage system of Fairborn PD was suddenly restored following a months-long technical interruption. With temporary admin access, Nadia discovered a surveillance recording from Lee's Market, the very place where Micah had been accused of theft. The footage showed something else entirely. The 17-year-old wasn't stealing. He had bent down to help Mr. Walter Dunley, an elderly man suffering from dementia who had dropped his wallet. Moments later, when Mr. Dunley slipped and fell, Micah had pulled out his phone, not to run, but to call for medical help. The very next day, all charges were dropped. When the verdict of acquittal was announced, Micah said nothing. He simply turned his head toward his sister, the woman who had just altered the course of his life, and gave her a slight nod, a nod that said, "We're not done yet, but you got me out of the first storm." And that evening, as she stood in front of her mirror in a small apartment on the north side of town, Nadia stared at her reflection, her fingers gently tracing the bruise across her sternum. She whispered, "That kick wasn't just aimed at me. It was a warning shot against anyone who dares to do what's right." 21 days after that historic kick, another door opened, not in a courtroom, but on the third floor of Fairborn Police Headquarters. Nadia Trammell stood in front of the internal records room, one sealed with a fingerprint lock, accessible only to the old command staff. She entered the new security code, a code granted solely to the chief of police. With a heavy metallic click, the door groaned open like it hadn't moved in years. Inside were 287 internal complaint files, most labeled pending review or insufficient evidence. Several were clipped with red tags, a legacy system code meaning high priority but sensitive, which really meant don't touch. Nadia put on gloves and pulled the first file. The first page read, Estelle Morgan, age 68 at the time of filing. Summary note, injury from fall during pursuit at Lee's Market. Responding officer, Travis Langford. No video, no scene photos. She opened another. Jonas Beckett, age 41, charged with obstruction of a public officer. But a jailhouse medical report showed abdominal trauma and 2 fractured ribs. Officer report filed by Langford. Another one, Walter Dunley, age 74, lost a Rolex watch after being detained for suspicious behavior near Fairborn Night Market. No property log, no body cam footage. Officer of record, Langford. With each file she opened, Nadia felt a deeper chill down her spine, not from the air conditioning, but from the dawning realization of a terrifying pattern. Same name, same injuries, same delayed or missing evidence, and the same system that looked away. It wasn't just Langford. Under the approved stamps, she found names of former supervisors, some retired, some promoted, some now holding high-ranking positions at the Georgia State Police. To dig deeper, Nadia formed a discreet task force, the Core Review Unit. Just 3 people, but hand-picked. Ari Quill, the whistleblower who released the audio, now the lead analyst. Sheridan Pike, a seasoned data systems expert who once worked with the DOJ. And Jalen Morgan, the law student son of Estelle, now determined to rewrite the story that buried his mother. This team didn't use the old software. Instead, They connected to the Clear Track portal, an independent platform that allowed civilians to resubmit complaints and help flag incidents tied to specific officers. The result? 42 complaints naming Langford, none of which had ever been investigated. One night, Ari uncovered a disturbing document, an encrypted internal memo once sent from a former deputy director to all regional commanders. It read, "Officers with high arrest numbers must be shielded from political noise. The system prioritizes consistent performance over moral debate." Nadia read it 3 times, not because she didn't understand, but because she couldn't believe it was written so plainly. Instead of fury, she let out a low, short laugh. "They thought silence was safety," she said, glancing over at Ari. "But each one of these files is an untold story. And now we're going to tell all of them." The next morning, Nadia submitted a formal request to convene a special oversight commission for the city, along with a list of 19 cases to be reopened. Of those, 6 showed signs of evidence tampering. 4 raised red flags for falsified reports. 2 involved missing body cam footage. Langford was already in temporary custody, but the system that had once protected him was finally beginning to shake. Saturday night, the old community hall in Eastbridge, once used for senior dance classes, was packed wall to wall, not for dancing, but for the first public forum hosted by the Core Review Unit. On the wooden stage, a soft amber spotlight cast warm light on Jonas Beckett, the man who'd once been left with broken ribs after Langford accused him of walking the wrong way in a Walmart parking lot. Jonas stepped up to the microphone, his hand still trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of 4 years spent silent. "That day, I had no camera, no witnesses, and no lawyer," he said, swallowing hard. "All I had was a bone-deep shame of being labeled a threat just because I was walking toward my own car." Soft sighs filled the room. Head shook slowly. Tears welled in more than a few eyes. In the middle row, Estelle Morgan, now 74, sat beside her son Jalen, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath a black ball cap, her smile gentle, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. She spoke next, voice steady but not soft. "I was arrested because a store clerk said I wandered too much." She paused, lips pressed together. "I was handcuffed, pushed into the back of a patrol car like a criminal, and the man who did it was Travis Langford." The room went still. I was 68 at the time, and all I wanted was to buy a bag of red beans for my gumbo that night. Applause followed, not thunderous, but firm, the kind that comes from people who have been quiet for far too long. Near the back row, Elijah Rowe, 16 years old, wearing a white hoodie and gripping the mic like a young rapper, stepped forward to speak. But he didn't talk right away. He was the one who had filmed the video. He opened his phone and played an audio clip. A child's voice rang out, soft but clear. "I saw it. Officer Langford didn't say anything. He just grabbed that guy by the collar and slammed him on the car." The room held its breath. It was Elijah's voice at age 12, recorded during a school counseling session. A session his mother, a nurse, had quietly saved and once submitted as part of an internal complaint. It had been dismissed at the time as inadmissible evidence. Elijah paused the playback. "I stayed silent," he said, eyes locked on a crowd, "because no one wanted to hear a black kid talk about a white cop. But now I get it. Silence is a kind of approval, too." A white man stood up, plaid shirt, baseball cap, broad shoulders. People suspected he had been one of the skeptics, maybe even one of Nadia's loudest critics. But when he took the mic, he said only one sentence. "Ms. Trammell, I used to think you were tearing this city apart, but after tonight, I think you're saving it." He placed the mic down. The whole room stood. This time, the applause was thunderous, and it didn't stop quickly. On the side, Nadia Trammell stood in shadow, watching from the edge. She didn't need to go up. Her story was no longer hers alone to tell. That night, Jalen Morgan uploaded the full recording of the event to YouTube. Within 24 hours, It hit 340,000 views, shared by civil rights groups, former officers from Ashwood, Bridgetown, and even Atlanta, just as Nadia had predicted. When truth comes from the forgotten, it doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be heard. News of the forum spread faster than expected. Some called it Fairborn's Night of Reckoning. But Nadia knew the deeper truth. When light shines on what's hidden, the darkness doesn't disappear. It shifts. Monday morning, a nameless envelope was found beneath the door of the police chief's office. Inside was a strip of newspaper. On it, a message written in thick black marker. If you dig too deep, don't be surprised when this whole town starts to suffocate. That same day, 3 local papers, including the Fairborn Tribune, suddenly ceased all coverage of Nadia's investigation. Previously published articles about the Langford case vanished from their websites. In their place were new headlines. Fairborn faces trust crisis amid misinformation. New police chief divides, not heals. Nadia wasn't surprised. She had anticipated resistance. But what she hadn't expected was what happened the following night. When she returned to her apartment in the northern part of town, the hallway light flickered. The front door was locked, but the lock had been tampered with. Inside, everything appeared undisturbed, except for one detail: a photo frame of her and Micah as children, face down, glass shattered, in a perfectly circular break. No damage, no mess, just a reminder that someone had been there and could return. Nadia sat down slowly, phone in hand. She didn't call the police. She called Sheridan Pike and said just one sentence: "It's begun. Increase encryption and lock all core unit files inside the clear track system." 3 days later, at a closed-door hearing of the town council, an anonymous witness suddenly stepped forward, requesting to meet Nadia privately before testifying. His name was Ricky Mallard, a former armored truck driver who once transported campaign donations for local politicians. Ricky, his eyes foggy from diabetes, hair white, hands clutching a wooden cane, revealed something that made the entire room go silent. "I delivered over $130,000 in cash to Gordon Ellsworth's office, but wasn't from any budget line. It came from an anonymous fund, which I later learned was from donors protecting Langford." Ricky handed over receipts, scribbled ledger notes, and even a covertly recorded call from his old work phone. In the audio, a man, later confirmed to be Gordon Ellsworth, says, "I don't care who he roughs up, as long as arrests go up. The media loves numbers." Nadia listened, eyes closed for just a second, then opened again. "It's starting, isn't it?" Sheridan whispered. "No," Nadia said, voice low and calm. "This is the main act." The next morning, Sunrise in Georgia, a major morning show, aired an exclusive live interview with Gordon Ellsworth, the head of the state judicial council. He denied every allegation, called Nadia a threat to constitutional order, and hinted at recommending her temporary suspension within 48 hours. At the same time, a coordinated shadow campaign kicked off. Core review team members' emails were flooded with spam attacks. Data in the clear track system mysteriously vanished 12 hours before its scheduled backup. An anonymous complaint was filed in court, accusing Nadia of abusing her authority to manipulate investigations for personal political gain. It felt like the tide was turning. But then, Nadia Trammell stood outside Fairborn City Hall for a live broadcast. No teleprompter, no prepared notes, just her voice. Steady, measured. "I don't seek justice for reputation. I seek justice for the ones who've lost their voice. And I will not be silent. You can delete files, threaten me, set traps, but it's too late to stop the truth." 3 days later, Nadia walked into the press room of the Fairborn Civic Data Center, a sleek, modern space built with community reform funds. Behind her, a massive LED screen displayed a single phrase in bold: "Justice isn't an opinion. This is data." Reporters packed the room. There were representatives from the New York Times, ProPublica, and CNN South. Some had once criticized her. Today, They came not to hear Nadia speak, but to watch her prove it. She didn't stand alone. At her side was Sheridan Pike, manning the interactive board, and Ari Quill, leading the data analytics. The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. The first image, a digital heat map of Fairborn, divided by district, with deep red tones marking areas with the highest arrest rates over the past 5 years. You're looking at 12,473 arrests, Sheridan began. From 2018 to 2023, we cross-referenced residential address records and applied demographic data to determine racial background. Then came the second data layer, resident race distribution, and a chilling overlap emerged. Every area with the highest arrest rates matched 95% with neighborhoods where over 70% of residents were people of color. Ari stepped forward. Now we filter by reason for arrest. He tapped once. The map shifted. This time, blue dots appeared, each representing an arrest for charges like non-compliance, aggressive demeanor, or failure to obey verbal commands. As you can see, Ari explained, these aren't hard crimes. These are soft labels used to justify force. A reporter raised their hand. So what you're saying is, the system is coded to legitimize racial bias through language? Nadia's voice was steady. I'm not saying it. The data is... Next, the screen shifted again. A new chart appeared. 78% of arrests for non-compliance never resulted in prosecution. And of those, 42% were tied to officers who had prior complaints filed against them. Leading that list, Travis Langford. But it didn't stop there. Sheridan played a compilation video. 6 restored body cam clips pulled from the department's previously locked archives. Each showed arrests with no resistance. Yet suspects were punched, choked, even dragged. In one short clip, Langford could be heard whispering to a fellow officer after cuffing a suspect. Mark it non-compliant. Easier to justify. The room fell silent. Even the sound of camera shutters paused. Nadia's team had built more than just a heat map. They constructed a system flow map. It didn't just show Langford. It revealed a pattern. Every complaint filed from 2018 to 2023, the ones marked dismissed unfounded, or that vanished completely, all funneled to one final destination, the Georgia State Judicial Council, and its chairman, Gordon Ellsworth. For 9 years, Gordon Ellsworth never appeared in the press. But behind the scenes, he was the one deciding where high-performance budgets were distributed, rewarding officers with arrest numbers above quota, with new equipment, patrol cars, and paid service trips. Langford was one of those officers. When federal investigators stepped in, a leaked internal email revealed Ellsworth had once ordered a halt on all rear reviews concerning Langford, claiming they would disrupt quarterly performance metrics. 3 weeks later, Gordon Ellsworth was subpoenaed. For the first time in his nearly 30-year career, he sat in the witness chair. No immunity, no personal aid, and nothing between him and the truth. Ari stepped forward to deliver the closing statement. We've lived under a system where an officer's feelings outweighed a citizen's facts. But now, justice has new tools, charts, maps, and digital evidence. Nadia faced the camera. I don't need you to believe me. I need you to look at the screen behind me. The truth is no longer buried in lost files. It's here, and it's looking back at you. That same evening, the data presentation broadcast was aired across Georgia. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeByNumbers went viral. The Human Rights Watch, HRW, publicly demanded that the state of Georgia launch an independent investigation. Hours later, journalists uncovered a stunning revelation. 2 former Fairborn judges, who had dismissed lawsuits against Langford, were now sitting on the board of a private company supplying gear to SWAT units. Under the glare of data, those who once thought they'd hidden their footprints in the sand began to realize the sand was drying under the rising heat of daylight. After the bombshell data release, the people of Fairborn stopped being silent. Every morning, long lines began forming outside the temporary headquarters of the Core Review Unit, not for protests, but to submit old letters, rejected complaints, or simply retell what they had once been forced to forget. One of them was Walter Dunley, 74. Years ago, Officer Langford had ripped his watch off at the courthouse while he was filing taxes. Back then, the report said Dunley was acting suspicious. Today, he brought a handwritten letter dated 2019, his pen trembling. "I just want my wife's old watch back. It was a keepsake. I wasn't aggressive. I'm just old and asked too slowly." Nadia read the letter in silence, then turned to the legal team. "Begin the review file. He doesn't need to hire a lawyer. He submitted it on time. The system failed, he didn't." Within 3 weeks, the newly named initiative, Rooted Review, was launched. No traditional hearings. No expensive lawyers. No bureaucratic delays. Every citizen who ever filed a complaint, even those marked misplaced, denied, or resolved internally, would now be given the right to hear their own voice again. Ari Cool stepped forward and explained, "We're not just tracing individual actions. We're asking who received this file, who ignored the red flags, who signed off to let that officer stay in the field, and who got praise for high processing efficiency." Even as complaints skyrocketed, a second screen appeared, this time a network diagram. 7 senior investigators reassigned. 2 judges suspended. 1 records chief resigned after it was discovered he had personally shredded 63 complaints over 2 years. The final hearing of the month was held in the auditorium of East Fairborn High School, the very same place where Micah, Nadia's younger brother, had once been wrongfully prosecuted. Every seat was filled, the elderly, the youth, working class and professional alike. On stage, Nadia didn't chant slogans. She simply shared a short story. "When I was little, I once spilled a watercolor palette all over the classroom map. I was terrified, thinking my teacher would scold me, but she didn't. She just said, 'Nadia, sometimes the colors running off help us see the areas we hadn't colored in yet.' I never forgot that lesson. Justice is the same. It's not always neat, but when it spreads in the right direction, it brings clarity to the spaces we once left blank." The Rooted Review system quickly gained attention, with several other states reaching out to learn from it, and in Fairborn, as many who once had began to emerge. One truth stood clearer than ever. Justice doesn't come from toppling one person. It begins when we listen again, to every voice that was ignored. 2 months after Rooted Review went live, Fairborn entered a quiet but powerful transformation. No fireworks, no banners lining the streets, but something had shifted. At the roots, at City Hall, Mayor Donovan Reeves held a special citizen session to announce an official redesign of the town flag. The new flag bore no seal, no law enforcement badge, no bold motto, just a band of soft gray and white, like a complaint form that was never read. "This is our reminder," he said, "that we once forgot too many things. And from now on, no line of text will be dismissed as not important enough." At the office of the Core Review Unit, Nadia Trammell still arrived each morning at 7:15 a.m. sharp, carrying her steel coffee flask, her worn canvas tote, and a steady resolve that never wavered, quiet but unshakable. When she was nominated for the Federal Civil Justice Award, she declined. "I didn't do this to have my name engraved anywhere," she said. "I did this to unearth the names that were buried beneath the truth." The reporters asked why she refused television interviews. Nadia simply smiled and pointed out the window. "Go out there and listen to them. Justice doesn't need me to tell it. It's already being told, by the very people no one used to believe." In a small basement room of the Fairborn Police Department, a surveillance camera hung in the corner, quietly recording a cold metal table. Sitting across from it was Travis Langford. No badge, no gun, no trace of the uniform that once commanded fear. In front of him sat a printed list of questions. Nadia wasn't in the room, but she had left the final line at the bottom of the page. Without the title, "Who are you?" no answer came. Just silence. But it wasn't the silence of authority anymore. It was the silence of a man forced to confront who he really was. The following week, students from East Fairborn High held a memory reconstruction event on the school's football field. Each carried a blank white sheet, symbolizing the forgotten complaints, the buried reports. There were no speeches, no microphones, just hundreds of white sheets thrown into the air all at once, then drifting back down gently like an apology and a promise. From the back row, Nadia stood alone. No name tag, no introduction, just watching. Ari Cool stepped beside her and whispered, "You staying for another term?" Nadia didn't answer right away. She looked up at the papers still spinning in the breeze, then finally replied, "I don't think my term should be measured in years. I think it should end when justice no longer needs someone to hold it." And that's how Fairborn was reborn. Not with a gunshot, not with a hero's name, but with a single question strong enough to make the entire system answer itself.